So we've read the story of immigration and already done some thinking with it. You were asked to first read the text, and when you did so, you should have gotten probably the gist of what it was about and that you were being informed. And that's often what we do when we first read any text. Now, I ask you to go back into this text again, looking at it more closely, particularly for some significant ideas. Most in particular, I asked you to take a look at potential structures of the text and how different sections lend themselves very well to specific ways of thinking. You looked at what was described, what things were given to us in sequence. You considered comparing and even contrasting information, looked at potential problems and how they were solved, and some events that had happened and some of maybe the causes or how they happened and the effects of those events. Now I'm asking you to go back into the text again to reread parts because we want to look for, in particular, connections and relationships. So, we're going to ask ourselves, what now are we really noticing? And we're really going to put our metacognition into action. So at this point, I'm going to take you back to an idea of a thinking continuum. That is, when we read text, our thinking can range from more of that lower level, just what's on the surface, to diving deep below the surface. When we go below the surface, of course, we're using information from a text and we're mixing it in with our own thinking and ideas. Often this means that we're combining what we may already know, or we're starting to realize that there are things that perhaps we need to know, or things we're wondering more about. And so, I move towards another big learning goal that we have, where we can identify events, ideas, and concepts. This particular text does not include procedures or steps in a process. We're also looking to use that specific information to explain these events, these ideas, and these concepts, including what's happening and why. Now, it helps for me to think about connections or relationships that I can look for when I'm reading informational text. If there are events in a text, I'm going to think about the impact they have on people. If there are problems, I'm going to look for potential solutions. If there are ideas or concepts, maybe what caused these things to happen or what effect they have. I'm going to compare things as I look for ways they're alike and ways they're different. And then I might look for relationships that give me sequence or order. And so this particular learning goal does connect to what we did with text structures, but it allows us to take this thinking a little bit further. So when we think about some of these events that are happening, of course we've got, the whole idea of immigration and it happening in waves. We've got voluntarily, involuntarily, legally, and illegally. We've got the idea of persecution as a thing that happens. When we think about ideas, we have these laws. And one of the big ideas here is that the laws were perhaps a solution for the problem of people not being welcome. Then we've got this general notion or these abstract ideas of these symbols, the immigration centers and the Statue of Liberty. And so these are just some of the things that we can really look more closely at. Of course, at the heart of this all are then the people or the individuals or even groups of people involved. So let's dive into some of this thinking. Now, to help our thinking along, I'm going to invite you to get these note catchers. It'll help us kind of really push our thinking to look at these connections and relationships. So let's start by looking at this kinds of immigration setting. Of course, we know that this section focuses on the idea of those voluntary immigrants and the involuntary immigrants. Now, of course, our voluntary being people that were choosing to leave. And, I noted that one of the reasons or one of the events was because they were persecuted or persecution, meaning that they were just treated horribly. Now, when I read the captions here, it talked about refugees. And so refugees being people. This describes what refugees are, people who have left their homeland, but they have nowhere to go. And so when we think about our events here, we've got people who are coming in legally, or we have legal immigration, and then we have illegal immigration. And under the illegal part, we've got that they are sneaking into or being smuggled into. So let's explore the connections then. What are the connections between the voluntary and the involuntary, and the idea of them coming in legal or illegal? Well, first we know that as a reason, some are coming for a better life. Maybe they're trying to become free from this persecution. It begs the question, though, then, when we talk about refugees, are these refugees voluntary or involuntary? If we read up here, we know that they have nowhere to go. So it kind of leaves a little bit of an unanswered question for us. And then when we think about legal and illegal, can we consider, is there a way then that legal immigrants could become illegal, and vice versa? Could an illegal immigrant become legal? So of course, there are a lot of connections for us to think about between our individuals or groups of people and the events that are happening in this text. Now, in the section on waves of immigration, we can look closer at what was happening and why did it happen. This sequences out all of our different waves. And so we have wave 1 that was happening from the early 1600s until 1830. This is then happening before America became a country. In fact, it even noted that it was happening prior to the American Revolution. If we look at why this was happening, we know that it outlined that in the previous section that people were coming for religious freedom. They were trying to get free from persecution. Perhaps they were coming to start a new life. And they were coming to settle in a new world. But then we also read that a lot of that involuntary happened with slaves. And the reason why is because workers were needed. So it was during this wave that slaves started coming in as workers. So that's why this event was happening. Now, as we read on about wave 2, we read that it happened from 1870 to 1890. And while this seems like a relatively short period of time, it did note that people were coming from both Europe and now Asia. However, it leaves a little bit of a question then. Why? Could it be for some of the same reasons, or maybe there are some other reasons? So I find that that is interesting and kind of leaves us perhaps wanting to know more. This might be an area where we might need to go beyond the text. Wave 3 then was noted to have occurred from 1890 to 1930. This is the one up here where it notes it was the biggest influx of immigrants. So this 40-year period is when we were noting that people were coming for much of those same reasons, really, as previous waves it said. This leads me then to infer that it's probably because people were maybe looking for religious freedom or to start a new life. And then finally, what was happening in wave 4? Well, wave 4 is then that wave from the 1960s, still happening today. Now, this fourth wave says it consists of many waves, but it notes some of the reasons to be because people were leaving for civil strife, political upheaval, or war. So links to the why this fourth wave happened and is happening: civil strife, political upheaval, and then wars. There also was reference noted to escaping poverty. People looking to escape a life of poverty. As we get into the immigration laws section, we know that most of the immigrants prior to the American Revolution had come from Western Europe. And so from our reading from before, this was then wave 1. Now, we note that we have laws that were passed after that time, giving requirements. However, there still really wasn't quite a bit. And so people from other parts start to arrive. So it seems like we have few restrictions at first. But then after the revolution, people from other parts of the world start to come. And this leads to the idea of new immigrants not being welcomed. Which then means that we have this pressure happening. There's pressure on the government to do something about it, or to keep immigrants out. So now we get into, okay, we need some solutions here. the government comes up with a few. We get that Chinese Exclusion Act. We get in 1917, we've got exclusions again, and we've got reading tests added. And then we've got a quota law in 1921, just as some examples. So the idea of more immigrants coming in and the pressure to keep them out creates this problem here where, yeah, there were few restrictions. People were coming from other areas and they weren't welcome. And so in order to solve that, we have these things. Now, one thing that I find interesting in this section is the idea of needing to pass these laws and thinking about first, we have people who have come before the revolution. And then we have people who are those new immigrants in future waves. And see here we've got people from other parts of the world begin to arrive. And then, of course, we've got that they're not welcome. So it gets me to think back again here to, okay, the idea, then why did these people come? Why did these people come? I think they're connected then. You know, what was their motivation? I have to start asking, though, then, why were these people not welcome? So I think of the idea of people coming and why, people coming and why. How come we've got people that are now not welcome? Great thing for us to discuss. Symbols of immigration are great concepts to consider. It's these abstract ideas. A symbol is something that represents something else. And when we think about what our symbols represent, particularly the Statue of Liberty, but I'm going to expand my thinking to think that Ellis Island was also a symbol of freedom and hope. So one of the first concepts we have in this section is we have these immigration centers. See, we've got another one. So we have one, Ellis Island. We have the other, Angel Island. And then we've got this idea of the Statue of Liberty. Excuse me, this concept. And the idea that this statue can stand for something more abstract. So similarities between the two, I think they both represent freedom. I think they symbolize immigrants in general. I could go with some obvious differences, obviously with the centers, one being on the East Coast in New York, one on the West. And then I could go with probably, and a more obvious is that one serves a purpose, or the centers serves a purpose to help people, while the other is just a giant statue. But I'm using these to frame my thinking. I gotta fix my spelling here. And now finally, I'm going to wrap my head around this final section. And I want to think about events. I kind of am thinking about how, we've got the first wave, and then we've got waves 2 and 3, and then we've got wave 4 today. And if I think about the individuals involved, I'm thinking about legal immigrants and illegal immigrants, and kind of how this all connects. When I think about the first wave, I know that we had voluntary immigrants, and of course that included some of our indentured servants, as well as those people that were coming for a better life. But wave 1 also included those involuntary ones, those slaves. I don't really know if we had any illegal immigration going on, because up until a certain point, it was legal to bring slaves. Slavery being abolished in the late 1860s. So I would say during waves 2 and 3 that, of course, slaves were no longer legal. Makes me wonder if any more of that might have been happening, and if so, then of course it fell under this illegal category. Still, lots to consider about what's happening with legal immigration. I'm guessing that there probably were no more indentured servants. However, it makes me wonder then what I could explore into what immigration was like during these waves and possibly those conditions. Now, I know from reading wave 4 today, we still have people coming over on airplanes, and it notes up here above, that's a common way. But then it also notes that we've got immigrants arriving illegally by boat. It even mentions small boats. It mentions people being smuggled as cargo. It mentions coming over on foot illegally, and even swimming over. And so just wrapping my head around this breakdown of types of individuals, legal and illegal, and noting these different events or these waves. So really what I've done is I've just taken an opportunity to think more deeply and kind of stretch and push my thinking. Overall, what did I do? I looked for connections and relationships between these events, ideas, and concepts. All of this thinking helped me go much deeper below the surface. It helped me consider what's going on in this text, and it offered me many opportunities to still have questions and to still have things that I want to learn more about.